Chapter 1, The Ultimatum. The crimson warning lights of Earth's orbital command center cast ominous shadows across the faces of humanity's last defenders. Admiral Kane stood at the center of the vast holographic display, his weathered features etched with the weight of countless battles. The scars running along his left temple, souvenirs from the massacre at New Geneva Colony, seemed to pulse in the artificial twilight of the command deck. "Signal confirmed, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Torres, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's definitely them." The hologram flickered to life, revealing the angular, predatory form of a Zarathi warship. Its obsidian hull gleamed with the bioluminescent patterns that marked it as a vessel of the Hegemony Empire, humanity's executioner for the past decade. The transmission that followed chilled the blood of every human in the solar system. "Primitive species of Sol 3, the mechanical voice translated the alien language with cold precision. "You have witnessed the fate of your colonies. 47 star systems have learned the price of defiance. The Kepler settlements, the Tau Ceti mining worlds, the agricultural domes of Proxima Centauri, all silent now, their inhabitants given the choice you face today." Captain Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her tactical genius mind already calculating impossible odds. At 34, she was the youngest fleet captain in Earth's history, her promotion earned through a series of brilliant defensive actions that had saved millions of civilian lives during the colony evacuations. Her dark eyes reflected the holographic flames that had once been human worlds. "Submit to the Hegemony Empire within 72 standard hours," the alien voice continued, "and your species will be granted the mercy of servitude. Resist, and join your colonies in eternal silence. This is not negotiation. This is inevitability." Dar. James Wright adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his former diplomat's training warring with the cold reality of intelligence analysis. Once, he had believed in the power of words to bridge the vast gulfs between species. The smoking ruins of humanity's outer colonies had taught him otherwise. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled up the tactical displays, 10,000 Hegemony warships versus Earth's mere 800 vessels. "Admiral," Wright's voice carried the weight of mathematical certainty, "their fleet composition shows classic overwhelming force doctrine. They're not expecting resistance, they're expecting surrender or extermination." Kane's jaw tightened as he stared at the tactical readouts. Somewhere beyond the asteroid belt, the largest armada in galactic history was already moving toward Earth. The Hegemony's strategy was as brutal as it was simple: psychological warfare through overwhelming superiority, followed by complete annihilation of any species foolish enough to resist. 72 hours, Kane repeated, his voice barely containing years of suppressed rage. The faces of his wife and daughter, vaporized when New Geneva fell, seemed to hover at the edge of his vision. "They're giving us time to think about it. To let fear do their work for them." The command center fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Outside the reinforced viewports, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the star field, beautiful and fragile and utterly defenseless against the storm approaching from the outer darkness. Captain Vasquez moved to stand beside her admiral, her tactical mind already working through scenarios that seemed to offer nothing but death. "Sir, if they're following standard Hegemony doctrine, they'll position their fleet at maximum weapons range and demand our surrender. When we refuse, and we will refuse, they'll demonstrate their power by destroying our outer defense platforms. And then they'll offer us one final chance to surrender before they glass the planet." Wright looked up from his intelligence displays, his face pale but determined. "There might be another option. My analysis of their previous conquests shows a pattern: they've never faced a species that struck first. Every civilization that fell to them fought defensively, trying to protect their worlds until the end." Kane turned to face the man who had once tried to negotiate peace with the Hegemony's advanced scouts. "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to show them what happens when they threaten humanity's home." The weight of the moment settled over the command center like a burial shroud. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, an empire that had crushed 47 civilizations was coming to collect its 48th conquest. But for the first time in their long campaign of galactic domination, they were about to encounter a species that had nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. Admiral Kane looked out at Earth one more time, then turned to face his officers. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a war to prepare for. Chapter 2, The Edge of Extinction. The Hegemony Empire. Fleet composition optimal. Admiral, reported his aide, a subjugated Altarian whose once proud warrior culture now served as menial crew aboard hegemony vessels. 10,000 warships in attack formation. Energy shield projectors at maximum efficiency. The human system lies defenseless before us. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. The humans would be another easy conquest, just like the 47 civilizations that had come before. The pattern was always the same: shock, denial, desperate defensive measures, and finally the sweet moment of surrender when they realized the futility of resistance. But in Earth's orbital command center, Admiral Marcus Kane was methodically shattering every assumption the hegemony had made about humanity. Fleet status report, Captain Vasquez, Kane commanded, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of battle preparations. Elena Vasquez stood before the three-dimensional tactical display, her fingers dancing across holographic controls as she repositioned Earth's defensive forces with the precision of a master chess player. All Resolute-class dreadnoughts are combat-ready, sir. Our kinetic railgun systems show 97% operational status, better than anything we achieved during the war games. Dr. Wright looked up from his intelligence station, his former diplomat's demeanor replaced by the cold calculation of a war strategist. Admiral, I've completed the analysis of hegemony fleet doctrine. They rely heavily on energy-based weapons systems and massive defensive screens. Their ships are designed for frontal assault against stationary targets. Which means they've never fought an enemy that specializes in kinetic projectile weapons. Our railgun rounds will pass right through their energy shields like they don't exist. Kane allowed himself a grim smile. And their fleet formations? Textbook Imperial Doctrine, Vasquez interjected, highlighting sections of the enemy fleet on the display. Massive ships in tight formations, designed to maximize intimidation factor and concentrated firepower. It's perfect for destroying planets and space stations, but vulnerable to fast-moving, independently operating smaller vessels, Kane finished. Doctor, what's our intelligence on their command structure? Wright pulled up a complex organizational chart showing the hegemony's military hierarchy. Extremely centralized. Each sector admiral has absolute authority over their fleet, but they're required to follow predetermined tactical doctrines. They don't improvise, they execute predetermined strategies. The implications were staggering. For 10 years, the hegemony had been fighting enemies who played by the same rules they did, massive fleets engaging in frontal assaults, energy weapons against energy shields, with victory going to whoever could bring the most firepower to bear. They had never encountered an enemy that would rewrite the rules of engagement. Captain Vasquez moved to the central display, her tactical genius mind already visualizing the battle to come. Admiral, request permission to implement Wolf Pack Protocol. Kane raised an eyebrow. Wolf Pack Protocol was Vasquez's theoretical innovation, small groups of fast attack vessels operating independently, striking at enemy weak points before fading back into the void. It had never been tested in actual combat, but computer simulations showed devastating effectiveness against traditional fleet formations. Explain your battle plan, Captain. Instead of meeting them head-on, we divide our fleet into independent strike groups. Each group consists of one Resolute-class dreadnought supported by 6 destroyers and 12 corvettes. They move independently, strike different targets simultaneously, then withdraw before the enemy can coordinate a response. Dr. Wright leaned forward, his intelligence analyst mind grasping the implications immediately. The hegemony fleet commanders won't know how to respond. Their doctrine calls for concentrated firepower against a single enemy formation. When they're facing 20 different attack groups coming from 20 different directions, their command structure will collapse into chaos. Kane nodded approvingly. They'll waste precious time trying to coordinate a response to threats they were never trained to handle. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. Earth's 800 ships would be dividing into small groups and attacking a fleet 12 times their size, relying on superior technology, innovative tactics, and the element of surprise to achieve what conventional wisdom said was impossible. As the final preparations continued, Kane found himself thinking about the families huddled in Earth's deep shelters, the children who might never see another sunrise, the entire future of human civilization hanging in the balance. The weight of command had never felt heavier, but neither had his resolve felt stronger. Fleet dispersal in 6 hours, he announced to the assembled officers. Every ship commander knows their target assignments. Every crew member understands the stakes. He paused, looking out at the stars where humanity's enemies waited in the darkness. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten the wrong species. Outside the command center's viewports, Earth's fleet began to scatter like seeds on the solar wind, each ship carrying with it the hopes and fury of an entire civilization that refused to go quietly into extinction. Chapter 3 First Blood. The outer rim of the solar system had never witnessed anything like the violence that was about to unfold. Admiral Zethkar's advanced scouts, 50 massive hegemony warships designed to cow primitive civilizations into submission, moved in perfect formation toward Earth's orbital defense platforms. Their energy shields shimmered like heat mirages, and their plasma cannons charged with the power to crack moons. But they never saw the wolves coming. Captain Elena Vasquez watched from the bridge of the UES Resolute as her tactical display showed the enemy formation approaching the outer defense perimeter. Her ship hung motionless in the shadow of Pluto, its black hull absorbing starlight like a void in space. Around her, 5 other strike groups waited in similar concealment, their crews barely breathing as they prepared to spring humanity's trap. Enemy scout fleet maintaining standard approach vector, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen from the tactical station. They're not even scanning for hostile forces, complete confidence in their superiority. Vasquez allowed herself a cold smile. Arrogance had been the downfall of every civilization the hegemony had conquered, and now that same arrogance would be their weakness. Signal all strike groups. Wolf Pack protocol is now active. Begin hunt pattern alpha. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. 6 human strike groups emerged from concealment simultaneously, their ships accelerating to attack velocity with a fury that defied physics. The Resolute's massive railgun system, a weapon that fired tungsten projectiles at 12% the speed of light, locked onto the hegemony flagship. Admiral Zethkar had exactly 4.7 seconds to realize that his species had made a catastrophic miscalculation about human capabilities. The first volley of kinetic rounds tore through the hegemony formation like invisible death. Their energy shields, designed to deflect plasma and laser weapons, were utterly useless against solid projectiles traveling at relativistic velocities. The enemy flagship simply came apart, its massive hull rupturing in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit up the outer system like a new star. Direct hit on primary target. Chen reported, her voice tight with disbelief. The flagship is gone, Admiral. Completely destroyed. But Vasquez was already moving to the next phase of her attack. All vessels, execute pattern beta. Hit their communication ships, then withdraw to rally point Tango. The human strike groups moved with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. Destroyers raked the enemy formation with concentrated railgun fire while corvettes darted between the massive alien ships like deadly insects, targeting sensor arrays and communication relays with surgical precision. Within 12 minutes, the hegemony scout fleet was blind, deaf, and leaderless. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the human ships vanished back into the void. The surviving hegemony vessels, less than half of the original 50, found themselves alone in the outer solar system, their commanders frantically trying to re-establish contact with their fleet. But their communication systems were scrap metal, and their confident advance had become a panicked retreat toward the main fleet. In the depths of space, Admiral Kane watched the tactical results flow across his command displays with grim satisfaction. First engagement results, Captain. 37 enemy vessels destroyed, 13 damaged and retreating, Vasquez reported from her position aboard the Resolute. Our losses, 0 ships destroyed, minimal damage to 3 destroyers. Wolf Pack protocol exceeded all simulation parameters. Dr. Wright looked up from his intelligence station, his face a mixture of elation and horror. Admiral, we've just accomplished something that hasn't been done in the galaxy for over a decade. We handed the Hegemony Empire a decisive military defeat. But Kane's weathered features showed no celebration. He had spent too many years studying warfare to believe that one victory, no matter how spectacular, would determine the outcome of this conflict. What's the enemy's response, Doctor? Long-range sensors show massive fleet movement from their core formation. They're mobilizing everything. This isn't just a retaliation, it's a full-scale extermination response. The implications were staggering. The Hegemony had never been defeated in open combat, and their response to humanity's unexpected victory was to commit every available resource to ensuring it never happened again. Instead of fighting 10,000 enemy ships, Earth now faced the prospect of battling the entire Hegemony war machine. Fleet status? Kane asked quietly. All strike groups have returned to designated rally points, Vasquez reported. Ammunition expenditure at 7%, no personnel casualties. The fleet is ready for Phase 2 operations. Kane nodded slowly, his mind already calculating the next moves in a chess game played across star systems. The first battle had been won through surprise and superior technology, but the war was far from over. The Hegemony would adapt, learn from their defeat, and return with overwhelming force. But as he looked out at the stars where human ships waited in the darkness, Kane felt something he hadn't experienced since the fall of New Geneva Colony, hope. For the first time in a decade, an empire that had seemed unstoppable had been stopped. For the first time since the war began, humanity had drawn first blood. Signal all fleet commanders, he ordered. Phase 2 begins in 6 hours. We're taking this fight to their home territory. The war for humanity's survival was just beginning, but in the cold depths of space where the wreckage of Hegemony ships drifted like metallic snow, the balance of power in the galaxy had begun to shift. Hashtag Chapter 4, Into the Fire. The Kepler 442 system had once been a paradise, 3 habitable worlds orbiting a stable star, home to the peaceful Altarian civilization for over 2 millennia. Now it served as a fortress world for the Hegemony Empire, its orbital shipyards churning out the vessels of conquest that had crushed 47 civilizations. Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the tactical displays show the massive industrial complex that had become humanity's next target. The decision to strike deep into Hegemony territory had been controversial. Some argued for a defensive strategy, letting the enemy come to them. But Kane understood that wars were won by seizing the initiative, not by waiting for extinction. Target analysis complete, Admiral, reported Dr. Wright from his intelligence station. Kepler 442 is the primary manufacturing hub for the Hegemony's Eastern Fleet. Destroying their shipyards would cripple their ability to replace losses and support extended operations. Captain Vasquez materialized on the holographic communication system from her position aboard the Resolute, her image flickering slightly due to the enormous distance between ships. Strike groups are in position around the system perimeter. The enemy has approximately 400 vessels defending the orbital installations, but they're configured for system defense, not fleet engagement. Kane studied the tactical situation with the eye of a veteran commander. The Hegemony defenders were positioned in a classical defensive formation around their shipyards, massive, heavily armed vessels designed to intercept incoming attacks and protect the industrial facilities. It was a formidable defense against conventional assault, but humanity had already proven that conventional tactics were useless against their innovative warfare. Dr. Wright, Intelligence Assessment of Enemy Defensive Capabilities. Their ships are larger and more heavily armed than the scout forces we engaged at the Outer Rim, Wright replied, pulling up detailed analysis displays. But they're still using the same energy-based weapons and shield systems. Our kinetic projectiles will retain their effectiveness, and their defensive formation actually works in our favor. Explain. They're positioned to create overlapping fields of fire against enemies approaching the shipyards directly. But if we attack from multiple vectors simultaneously, their formations become a liability. They'll be as likely to hit each other as they are to hit us. Vasquez's tactical genius was already visualizing the battle plan. Admiral, recommend implementation of hunter-killer protocol. We divide into smaller strike groups than before, teams of 4 ships each, and hit them from 30 different directions simultaneously. The audacity of the plan took even Kane's breath away. They were proposing to attack a heavily defended system with their ships divided into groups so small that each one would be outnumbered by a factor of 30 to 1. By every conventional measure of military strategy, it should have been suicide. But conventional strategy had never encountered an enemy like humanity. All strike group commanders, this is Admiral Kane. Execute hunter-killer protocol in T-60 minutes. Target priority is the orbital shipyards. Every facility we destroy is 100 enemy ships that will never be built. As the human fleet dispersed into its attack formations, Kane found himself thinking about the broader implications of their campaign. Each victory brought them deeper into hegemony territory, further from Earth's support, and closer to the inevitable moment when they would face the Empire's full military might. But each victory also sent a message that was spreading across the galaxy: the hegemony could be defeated. The attack began with the precision of a surgical strike and the fury of a natural disaster. 30 small groups of human ships materialized throughout the Kepler 442 system simultaneously, their railgun systems already locked onto priority targets. The defending hegemony fleet found itself facing threats from every direction at once, their carefully coordinated defensive formation dissolving into chaos as commanders struggled to respond to attacks they had never been trained to handle. Captain Vasquez led Strike Group Alpha in a devastating assault on the primary shipyard complex, her 4 ships moving in perfect coordination as they poured kinetic fire into the massive industrial structure. Primary target locked, firing sequence initiated, she reported, her voice calm despite the intensity of the battle raging around her. The shipyard complex, a structure the size of a small moon, shuddered under the impact of relativistic projectiles. Its defensive screens, designed to deflect energy weapons, were useless against solid matter traveling at 12% light speed. Entire sections of the facility began to collapse, taking with them the partially constructed hulls of dozens of enemy warships. Strike Group Beta, this is Admiral Kane. Status report. Secondary shipyard destroyed, Admiral, came the reply from Commander Torres. Minimal damage to our forces. The enemy defenders are still trying to coordinate a response. And therein lay the hegemony's fatal flaw. Their military doctrine had been perfected over centuries of conquest, but it was a doctrine based on overwhelming superiority and predetermined tactics. When faced with an enemy that refused to follow the established rules of warfare, their command structure became a liability rather than an asset. As the battle raged across the Kepler 442 system, something unprecedented began to happen. The conquered Altarian population, witnesses to their oppressor's first major defeat, began to rise in rebellion. Industrial facilities that the humans couldn't reach were sabotaged from within. Communication networks carried messages of hope to other conquered worlds. Dar. Wright monitored the intelligence reports flowing in from across hegemony territory with growing amazement. Admiral, we're receiving signals from 17 different conquered systems. Word of our victories is spreading faster than hegemony forces can suppress it. We're seeing the beginning of galaxy-wide resistance movements. The tactical victory at Kepler 442 was complete within 6 hours. Every major shipyard had been destroyed, the defending fleet was scattered or destroyed, and the local hegemony command structure had collapsed. But the strategic implications were even more significant. Humanity had proven that the Empire's industrial base was vulnerable, and their success had inspired other species to begin their own fights for freedom. As the human fleet regrouped in the outer system, preparing for the next phase of their impossible campaign, Kane allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the liberation of the entire galaxy. But in the depths of hegemony space, Emperor Vexthul was mobilizing the largest war fleet in galactic history. The humans had won battles, but the war was far from over. Chapter 5, The Emperor's Wrath. The throne room of the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion was a cathedral of conquest, its bioluminescent walls inscribed with the names of 47 vanquished civilizations. Emperor Vexthul, supreme ruler of the greatest empire in galactic history, stood before the massive tactical display showing the spreading cancer of human resistance across his domain. His form was a testament to Zarathi evolution, 9 feet of chitinous armor, compound eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously, and razor-sharp mandibles that had personally torn apart the leaders of a dozen species. But for the first time in his century-long reign, those eyes showed something the galaxy had never seen: uncertainty. "Explain to me," his voice resonated through the ship's organic communication system like the sound of grinding stone, "how a primitive species with 800 ships has destroyed 17 of my core worlds and inspired rebellion across 12 systems." Admiral Zethkar, survivor of the first human attack and now bearing the scars of defeat, trembled before his emperor's fury. "My lord, the humans fight with weapons and tactics we have never encountered. Their kinetic projectiles penetrate our shields as if they don't exist, and their fleet formations," a gesture from Vexthul's primary manipulator appendage silenced the admiral instantly. The emperor had spent the past week studying every engagement, analyzing every tactical report, trying to understand how his invincible empire was being systematically dismantled by a species that should have surrendered after their first defeat. "Show me their fleet positions," he commanded. The tactical display shifted to show the human forces scattered across what had once been secure hegemony territory. Instead of a single concentrated fleet, the humans had divided into dozens of independent strike groups, each one striking different targets before disappearing back into the void. It was like trying to fight smoke. "My lord," ventured General Thaxmore, the Empire's chief strategic planner, "our intelligence suggests the humans are led by individuals who think differently. They do not follow established military doctrine. They create new tactics with each engagement." Vexthul's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or might have been the sound of bones breaking. "Then we will show them the price of innovation. Mobilize the Grand Fleet. Every ship, every species under our dominion, every weapon in our arsenal. I will personally lead the final assault on their home world." The implications were staggering. The Grand Fleet was the largest military force ever assembled, 10,000 first-line warships supported by 5,000 auxiliary vessels, carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. It had never been deployed in its entirety because no enemy had ever warranted such overwhelming force. But across the galaxy, in the command center of the UES Resolute, Captain Elena Vasquez was planning something that would redefine the very concept of impossible odds. "Fleet status report," she requested from her tactical staff, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had never lost a battle. "All strike groups have completed their assigned missions," reported Commander Chen. "The hegemony's industrial capacity in this sector has been reduced by 67%. Their fleet replacement rate has dropped to less than 10% of pre-war levels." Dr. Wright looked up from his intelligence station, his expression a mixture of triumph and terror. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements from hegemony core worlds. They're mobilizing everything, the entire Grand Fleet is moving toward Earth." Vasquez studied the incoming data with the detached interest of a master tactician analyzing a particularly complex puzzle. The numbers were overwhelming: 15,000 enemy ships converging on Earth's location, led by the Emperor himself aboard the most powerful warship ever constructed. Estimated time to Earth intercept: 17 days at their current velocity, Wright replied. "They're not even trying to conceal their approach, this is meant to be a demonstration of absolute power." But Vasquez was already formulating a response that would turn the hegemony's greatest strength into their fatal weakness. "Signal Admiral Kane. Request immediate conference with all fleet commanders. I have a proposal." Within hours, the holographic images of Earth's surviving fleet commanders filled the Resolute's conference room. Admiral Kane's scarred features dominated the central display, while the faces of 30 other captains, the survivors of humanity's impossible campaign, looked on with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vasquez began, her voice cutting through the background static of deep space communications, "we are about to face the largest military force in galactic history. Every conventional analysis says we should retreat to Earth and prepare for a final defensive battle." Kane's weathered features showed no emotion. "I take it you have an unconventional suggestion, Captain. I propose we meet them halfway." The silence that followed was profound. Every officer present understood the implications. Instead of fighting a defensive battle with Earth's orbital defenses to support them, Vasquez was suggesting they intercept the Grand Fleet in deep space, where they would be outnumbered 20 to 1 with no possibility of retreat. "Explain your reasoning, Captain," Kane said quietly. "The Grand Fleet is massive, but that size is also a weakness. They're moving in a single concentrated formation because their doctrine calls for overwhelming force at the point of contact. But what if there is no single point of contact? What if we force them to fight in 100 different locations simultaneously?" The tactical display shifted to show Vasquez's proposed battle plan, and even experienced commanders found themselves struggling to comprehend its audacious scope. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet directly, the human ships would disperse throughout a volume of space larger than most solar systems, forcing the hegemony fleet to divide their forces or leave themselves vulnerable to attacks from multiple directions. "It's the wolf pack protocol taken to its logical extreme," she continued. "We turn their numerical superiority into a coordination nightmare. Make them fight our kind of battle instead of theirs." Commander Harrison of the UES Vengeance leaned forward in his holographic representation. "Captain, with respect, we're talking about 800 ships against 15,000. Even with our tactical advantages, the mathematics are overwhelming." Vasquez smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded everyone present why she had never lost a battle. "Commander, mathematics assumes both sides are playing by the same rules. We're about to show Emperor Vexthul what happens when the rules change." As the conference ended and Earth's fleet began its final deployment, Admiral Kane found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate defenders of a doomed world, they had become the liberators of an entire galaxy. Win or lose, they had already achieved something that would echo through history. But in the cold mathematics of space warfare, even legends could be overwhelmed by sufficient force. The Battle of Kepler 442 would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of every species in the galaxy. The Emperor was coming, and with him came the power to end worlds. Chapter 6, The Battle of Kepler 442. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as two forces that would reshape galactic history approached their moment of collision. In the void between star systems, the largest military engagement in recorded civilization was about to unfold, 15,000 ships of the hegemony Grand Fleet against 800 vessels carrying the hopes of not just humanity, but every conquered species dreaming of freedom. Emperor Vexthul stood in the command cathedral of the Eternal Dominion, his compound eyes tracking the tactical displays that showed his overwhelming armada deployed in perfect formation. At the center, his flagship commanded a corps of 2,000 heavy dreadnoughts. Surrounding them in concentric shells were 8,000 cruisers and destroyers, with 5,000 support vessels forming the outer perimeter. It was a formation designed to crush any opposition through sheer concentrated firepower. "Human fleet detected at extreme sensor range," reported his tactical coordinator, a subjugated Altarian whose species had once ruled a dozen worlds before the hegemony's arrival. "Their forces appear to be scattered across a massive volume of space. I'm reading independent fleet elements across 17 different sectors." Vexthul's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The primitive mammals attempt to avoid destruction by dispersing their forces. They only delay the inevitable. Signal all fleet commanders, standard engagement protocol. We advance as one unified force and crush each scattered element in sequence. But 3,000 kilometers away, aboard the UES Resolute, Captain Elena Vasquez was implementing a battle plan that would redefine the very concept of space warfare. "All strike groups, this is Control Actual, she transmitted across the encrypted human communications network. Cascade formation is now active. Execute pattern alpha on my mark. What happened next had never been seen in galactic military history. Instead of a traditional battle between two opposing fleets, the engagement became a three-dimensional chess game played across a volume of space larger than most solar systems. The human ships didn't attack the Grand Fleet, they attacked the concept of fleet coordination itself. Strike Group Alpha, led by Admiral Kane aboard the UES Defiant, materialized from the void directly above the Grand Fleet's formation and unleashed a devastating barrage of kinetic rounds into the enemy's communication array ships. Strike Group Beta attacked from below, targeting sensor platforms. Groups Gamma through Zeta struck from all sides simultaneously, their railgun systems reaching out across impossible distances to cripple the infrastructure that held the massive enemy formation together. Direct hit on primary command relay, reported Kane, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around his ship. Enemy fleet coordination is degrading rapidly. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the hegemony forces. Designed to fight as a single unified entity, the Grand Fleet began to fracture as local commanders lost contact with Central Command. Ships collided with each other as formation integrity collapsed. Weapon systems targeted friendly vessels as identification systems failed. Emperor Vexthul watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos with something approaching disbelief. How are they targeting our ships from such extreme ranges? Their weapons should not be effective at these distances. The answer lay in humanity's fundamental approach to warfare. While the hegemony had perfected energy weapons that required close engagement ranges, human kinetic systems could reach across interplanetary distances with devastating accuracy. The Grand Fleet had been designed to fight enemies who would come close enough to be overwhelmed by concentrated firepower. The humans were fighting from ranges where the enemy's numerical superiority became meaningless. Strike Group Prime, this is Admiral Kane. Begin Phase 2 operations. Captain Vasquez led 20 of humanity's fastest ships in a direct assault on the Grand Fleet's core formation, their vessels weaving between the massive enemy dreadnoughts like deadly insects. But this wasn't a conventional attack, it was a precision strike against the Emperor himself. Target acquired, Vasquez reported as the Eternal Dominion filled her tactical display. Flagship locked. All weapons firing. The Emperor's ship was a masterpiece of Zarathi engineering, 5 kilometers of armored hull bristling with enough firepower to level continents. Its defensive screens could deflect the energy output of entire fleets. But like every other hegemony vessel, it had never been designed to face relativistic kinetic rounds. The railgun volley struck the Eternal Dominion along its primary hull section, and for the first time in galactic history, an emperor of the hegemony empire felt his flagship shudder under enemy fire. Emergency alarms screamed through the bioluminescent corridors as structural integrity fields strained to contain the damage. Impossible, Vexthul whispered, his perfect certainty cracking like his ship's armor. No primitive species has ever. His words were cut off as a second volley from the human strike force tore through the flagship's command section. The emperor of the greatest military force in galactic history found himself fighting for survival aboard his own vessel as human boarding parties, led by Admiral Kane himself, cut through the ship's defenses with the fury of a species that had learned to turn desperation into strength. The battle raged across the ship's organic corridors, Zarathi warriors with energy weapons facing human marines equipped with kinetic rifles and the absolute conviction that came from fighting for the survival of their entire species. But it was in the flagship's command cathedral that the future of the galaxy was decided. Emperor Vexthul faced Admiral Marcus Kane in single combat, two warriors representing civilizations separated by millions of years of evolution but united in their understanding that only one could survive this moment. The Emperor's chitinous form gave him advantages in strength and natural armor, but Kane carried something that no amount of biological evolution could match, the accumulated fury of every human world the hegemony had destroyed. The battle was brief, vicious, and decisive. When it ended, the Emperor who had ruled the galaxy for a century lay dead on the deck of his own flagship, and the Admiral who had lost his family to the hegemony's conquest stood victorious over the corpse of tyranny itself. "This is Admiral Kane to all human forces," he transmitted across the communications network. "The Emperor is dead. Repeat, Emperor Vexthul is dead." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Across the Grand Fleet, hegemony commanders who had never known defeat watched their invincible emperor fall to the very species they had come to exterminate. Morale collapsed faster than their formation had, and within hours, the largest military force in galactic history was dissolving as individual species and commanders began to surrender or flee. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Captain Elena Vasquez, the tactical genius who had made the impossible victory possible, died when her ship took a direct hit from the flagship's main weapon during the final assault. Her sacrifice saved not just the human fleet, but the future of freedom itself. As the remnants of the Grand Fleet scattered to the stars, carrying word of the hegemony's defeat to every corner of the galaxy, Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the captured Eternal Dominion and realized that humanity had achieved something beyond mere survival. They had broken the chains that had bound the galaxy for centuries. The Empire was falling, and in its collapse, a new era of galactic civilization was about to be born. Chapter 7, The Domino Effect. The news of Emperor Vexthul's death traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that the hegemony had built to maintain control over their vast empire. But instead of coordinating the military response to a crisis, those same networks became the instrument of the Empire's destruction as word of the impossible defeat spread to every conquered world simultaneously. On Alterian Prime, the former jewel of a peaceful civilization that had been reduced to a slave world, the planetary governor received the transmission with disbelief that quickly transformed into terror. For the first time in decades, he could hear something that had been absent from his world since the conquest: hope in the voices of his people. Dr. James Wright, now serving as Admiral Kane's intelligence coordinator aboard the captured Eternal Dominion, monitored the cascade of rebellion reports flowing in from across hegemony space. His former diplomat's training had taught him to read between the lines of official communications, and what he was seeing exceeded even his most optimistic projections. "Admiral, we're receiving signals from 43 different star systems," Wright reported, his voice tight with amazement. "The conquered species aren't just celebrating, they're actively rising in rebellion. Infrastructure sabotage, attacks on hegemony garrisons, entire planetary defense forces switching sides." Kane studied the galactic display showing the spreading chaos across what had been the most stable empire in known history. Red markers indicated hegemony loyalist forces, but they were rapidly being overwhelmed by blue markers representing rebel forces and green markers showing systems that had declared independence. "What's the status of their remaining military assets?" "That's where it gets interesting," Wright pulled up detailed analysis screens. "Without central command authority, the individual fleet commanders are making independent decisions. Some are trying to maintain imperial control in their sectors. Others are negotiating surrender. But the majority are simply leaving." The psychological impact of the Emperor's death couldn't be overstated. The hegemony empire had been built on the fundamental premise of Zarathi superiority and the inevitability of imperial conquest. When a supposedly primitive species not only resisted but actually killed the Emperor in personal combat, the entire ideological foundation of the empire cracked like a dam under pressure. Admiral Kane moved to the tactical display, his scarred features reflecting the holographic light of a galaxy in transformation. "Signal all human fleet commanders. We're implementing Liberation Protocol across all sectors." Liberation Protocol was Captain Vasquez's final tactical innovation, developed during the long journey toward the Battle of Kepler 442. Instead of occupying conquered territory, human forces would assist local populations in establishing their own defensive capabilities before moving on to the next system. It was a strategy that recognized humanity's limitations. They simply didn't have the numbers to garrison an entire galaxy, while turning those limitations into strengths by creating a network of grateful allies. The first test case was the Tau Ceti system, where the aquatic Neptunian civilization had been enslaved for over 2 decades. Commander Harrison led Strike Group Delta in a swift assault on the hegemony garrison, but instead of accepting surrender, the human forces helped train local resistance fighters to take control of their own world. Tau Ceti liberation complete, Harrison reported. Local defense forces are operational and the provisional government has formally requested membership in what they're calling the Liberation Alliance. They're also offering their shipyards for our use. It was a pattern that repeated across dozens of systems. Species that had been conquered by the hegemony decades ago still remembered how to fight, they had simply needed someone to show them that the empire could be defeated. Human tactical advisors worked with local military commanders to adapt wolf pack protocol techniques to their specific capabilities, while human engineers helped rebuild defensive installations that had been destroyed during the original conquests. But the most significant development was happening in the heart of former hegemony space, where the Zorathi homeworld itself was dissolving into civil war. Without the Emperor's absolute authority to maintain unity, the various Zorathi clans began fighting among themselves for control of what remained of their empire. Intelligence from Zorathi Prime is chaotic, Wright reported during the daily briefing aboard the Eternal Dominion. At least 7 different clans are claiming imperial authority, and they're spending more resources fighting each other than they are trying to maintain control over their remaining territories. Kane nodded grimly. The collapse of the hegemony was happening faster than even their most optimistic projections had predicted, but it was also creating new challenges. A power vacuum across half the galaxy could lead to chaos that might be worse than imperial rule. Dr. Wright, begin drafting proposals for a galactic confederation structure. We need to help these species establish some form of cooperative government before the power vacuum leads to interspecies warfare. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Humanity, which had barely escaped extinction, was now being looked to as the leader of galactic civilization. The species that had been dismissed as primitive mammals had not only defeated the greatest empire in known history but was now being asked to help design its replacement. As the weeks passed and more systems joined what was becoming known as the Liberation Alliance, it became clear that the galaxy was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a multi-species cooperative government based on mutual defense and shared technological advancement rather than conquest and domination. The hegemony empire, which had seemed eternal just months before, was becoming a memory. In its place, a new form of galactic civilization was emerging, one that promised freedom, cooperation, and hope for the first time in centuries. But Admiral Kane knew that the hardest work was still ahead. Destroying an empire was difficult, but building something better in its place would test humanity's wisdom as much as the war had tested their courage. Chapter 8, Phoenix Rising. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, 442, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the orderly empire that had ruled it for centuries. Where once the hegemony's iron fist had maintained brutal peace through overwhelming force, now hundreds of independent worlds were learning to govern themselves for the first time in generations. The former hegemony capital world of Zorathi Prime had become a cautionary tale of how quickly an empire could collapse. Admiral Kane stood in the observation deck of the orbital station that had once been Emperor Vexthol's personal command center, watching as the planet below burned with the fires of civil war. 7 different Zorathi clans were fighting for control of what remained of their homeworld, each claiming legitimate succession to the imperial throne. Final casualty reports from the surface, Admiral, Dr. Wright reported, his voice heavy with the weight of the numbers. The Zorathi have lost approximately 60% of their population to internal warfare. Their industrial capacity is at less than 10% of pre-war levels. Kane's weathered features showed no satisfaction at his former enemy's self-destruction. The goal had never been the extermination of the Zorathi, it had been the liberation of their victims. But the complete collapse of their civilization was a sobering reminder of how quickly order could dissolve into chaos. Status of the Liberation Alliance integration efforts. Much more positive news there. Wright pulled up displays showing the expanding network of cooperative worlds. 47 systems have formally joined the alliance structure. They've agreed to the mutual defense protocols and are sharing technological resources. The Altarians are providing agricultural expertise to worlds damaged by hegemony strip mining. The Neptunians are helping establish underwater colonies on oceanic worlds. It's actually working, Admiral. The Liberation Alliance had been humanity's answer to the power vacuum left by the hegemony's collapse. Instead of replacing one empire with another, the Alliance operated on principles that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier: voluntary membership, shared governance, and mutual aid rather than conquest and tribute. But the real test of the new galactic order came when the first major crisis struck. The vegan system, which had been liberated early in the human campaign, sent out a desperate distress call that reached Alliance headquarters on the former hegemony capital ship. Admiral Kane, priority transmission from Vegan Command, the communications officer announced. They're under attack by Zarathi clan Thexmore. 3 heavy cruisers and multiple support vessels. The local defense force is requesting immediate assistance. Kane studied the tactical situation with the eye of a commander who had learned to see opportunity in every crisis. The vegan system was strategically important. Its shipyards were producing the new generation of hybrid vessels that combined human kinetic weapons with alien defensive technologies. But more importantly, how the Alliance responded to this first major threat would determine whether their new galactic order could survive. Signal the Alliance Council, Kane ordered. Request immediate vote on Resolution 1A, Mutual Defense Response. What followed was a moment that would define the future of galactic civilization. Representatives from 37 different species, connected by quantum communication networks across thousands of light-years, debated and voted on whether to risk their ships and crews to defend a world that many of them had never even visited. The vote was unanimous. Within 6 hours, the largest cooperative military force in galactic history was converging on the vegan system. Not a conquering army led by a single species, but a true Alliance fleet where Altarian captains served alongside human crews, where Neptunian navigation specialists guided ships crewed by former hegemony slaves, where species that had been enemies for centuries worked together toward a common goal. Commander Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to captain after Captain Vasquez's sacrifice, led the Alliance response fleet from the bridge of the new UES Elena Vasquez, a hybrid vessel that incorporated the best technologies from a dozen different species. As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the vegan system, she found herself commanding not just human ships, but vessels from 11 different Alliance species. All Alliance vessels, this is Captain Chen aboard the flagship. Tactical analysis shows 3 Zarathi heavy cruisers in standard attack formation approaching Vegan Prime. They appear to be using pre-war hegemony tactics. The irony was profound. The Zarathi attackers were still fighting the last war, using the same energy weapons and formation tactics that had once conquered the galaxy. But they were facing an enemy that had learned to adapt, to innovate, to combine the strengths of multiple species into something greater than the sum of its parts. The battle was swift and decisive. The Alliance fleet used modified wolf pack tactics, but with a crucial difference: instead of human ships operating independently, they fought as integrated multi-species units. Altarian ships provided long-range sensor support while human vessels delivered kinetic strikes. Neptunian commanders coordinated fleet movements while former hegemony auxiliary species used their intimate knowledge of Zarathi tactics to anticipate enemy responses. Enemy flagship taking critical damage, reported Lieutenant Torres from the tactical station. They're requesting parley. But Captain Chen's response reflected the new galactic order that was emerging from the ashes of the old empire. Signal the Zarathi commander. Tell him he can surrender to the Vegan Defense Force. This is their system to protect. When the battle ended, it wasn't human forces that accepted the Zarathi surrender, it was the very species that had been conquered and enslaved by the hegemony for decades. The symbolic importance couldn't be overstated. The galaxy's former victims had become its protectors. As news of the Alliance's first military victory spread across civilized space, something unprecedented began to happen. Systems that had remained neutral during the Empire's collapse began requesting Alliance membership. Species that had never trusted outsiders began opening their borders to cooperative trade and cultural exchange. Dr. Wright, now serving as the Alliance's first Director of Interspecies Relations, watched the transformation with amazement that bordered on disbelief. Admiral, we're receiving membership applications from systems in every sector of the galaxy. The Alliance is growing faster than we can process the requests. Kane nodded slowly, his mind already working on the challenges that rapid expansion would bring. Dr. Wright, begin drafting protocols for alliance expansion. We need to ensure that we're building something sustainable, not just replacing the hegemony with a different kind of empire. As he looked out at the stars where former enemies now worked together as allies, Kane reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, humanity had faced extinction. Now they were helping to build a new form of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest, on mutual aid rather than domination. The hegemony empire was dead, but from its ashes was rising something that the galaxy had never seen before, a true alliance of equals, united not by fear but by hope for a better future. #Epilogue. Legacy of the Alliance. 5 years had passed since Admiral Marcus Kane stood in Earth's orbital command center and heard the hegemony empire's ultimatum. Now, he walked through the corridors of Unity Station, the massive space habitat that served as the capital of the Galactic Liberation Alliance, marveling at how profoundly the galaxy had changed. The station itself was a testament to what cooperative civilization could achieve. Built in the neutral space between former hegemony core worlds, it incorporated architectural elements from 63 different species. Alterian bioluminescent gardens grew alongside human hydroponic farms. Neptunian water features flowed through corridors designed by crystalline Zephyrian engineers. It was both functional and beautiful, a symbol of unity emerging from diversity. Admiral Kane called a familiar voice from across the central plaza. Dr. James Wright approached, his former intelligence analyst's bearing now replaced by the confident stride of a successful diplomat. "The council is ready for your final briefing." Kane nodded, adjusting the dress uniform that bore not just human insignia, but the stars representing each of the Alliance's 247 member worlds. At 72, he was preparing for retirement, ready to pass the torch to a new generation of leaders who would guide the galaxy into an uncertain but hopeful future. The Alliance Council chamber was a marvel of engineering and diplomacy. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in environmental enclosures suited to their particular biology, while holographic displays provided real-time translation of dozens of languages. At the center of it all, a three-dimensional map of the galaxy showed the steady spread of Alliance influence, not through conquest, but through voluntary association. "Distinguished representatives," Kane began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "when I first stood before enemy forces 5 years ago, humanity faced a simple choice: surrender or extinction. Today, I stand before you to report that we have achieved something that once seemed impossible. We have built a galactic civilization based on freedom rather than fear." The statistics were remarkable. Alliance territory now encompassed 72% of the galaxy's inhabited systems. Trade between member worlds had increased by 400% since the hegemony's fall. Technological advancement, freed from the constraints of imperial doctrine, was proceeding at unprecedented rates. Perhaps most importantly, the last 5 years had seen no major interspecies conflicts, the longest period of galactic peace in recorded history. But Kane's report also acknowledged the challenges that remained. The Zarathi homeworld was still embroiled in civil war, its once proud civilization reduced to a fraction of its former population. Refugee populations from the Empire's collapse strained Alliance resources. And in the galaxy's outer reaches, reports suggested that new threats might be emerging from species that had never encountered either the hegemony or the Alliance. "The work we began in desperation," Kane continued, "must now be continued in wisdom. The Alliance has proven that cooperation can triumph over conquest, but maintaining that cooperation will require constant vigilance and commitment from every member world." Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen and Kane's designated successor as Alliance Supreme Commander, stood to address the Assembly. Her presence represented the new generation of leaders, those who had been forged in the crucible of the hegemony war but who would now face the different challenges of peacetime governance. "Admiral Kane's leadership showed us that even the most overwhelming odds can be defeated when free peoples stand together," she said. "But he also taught us that victory in war is meaningless unless it leads to something better. The alliance we have built together represents humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization, not our weapons or our tactics, but our belief that all sentient beings deserve the right to determine their own destiny." As the formal ceremonies concluded and Kane prepared for his retirement to a small colony world at the galaxy's edge, he found himself thinking about the friends who hadn't lived to see this moment. Captain Elena Vasquez, whose tactical genius had made victory possible. The thousands of human crew members who had died in battles across a dozen star systems. The civilians on both sides who had paid the ultimate price for the freedom that now seemed so natural. But he also thought about the children playing in Unity Station's parks, human children alongside Alterian younglings, Neptunian larvae, and the offspring of a dozen other species. They were growing up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated rather than feared, where different species worked together as equals, where the word empire was becoming a historical curiosity. Dr. Wright joined him at the observation deck as Kane took one last look at the galaxy he was leaving in younger hands. Any regrets, Admiral? Kane considered the question carefully. The cost of their victory had been enormous, and the responsibility of leadership had aged him beyond his years. But as he watched Alliance vessels from dozens of different worlds moving peacefully through space that had once been torn by warfare, he felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war began: contentment. None, he said finally. We set out to save humanity from extinction. Instead, we helped save the entire galaxy from tyranny. Not a bad legacy for a species that was supposed to surrender or die. As Kane's transport prepared to depart Unity Station for the last time, carrying him toward a peaceful retirement among the colonists of New Eden, the galaxy continued its transformation. Alliance exploration fleets were pushing into previously unknown regions, making contact with new species and extending the invitation to join the growing community of free worlds. The Hegemony Empire, which had once seemed eternal and invincible, was becoming a cautionary tale told to children about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of standing up to bullies, no matter how overwhelming they might seem. And in the deepest archives of Alliance historical records, scholars were already documenting the lessons of the Hegemony War, that freedom defended is freedom preserved, that cooperation trumps conquest, that even the smallest force can change the course of history when it fights for something greater than itself. The last stand of humanity had become the first step toward a new galactic age, an age where the word empire would never again cast its shadow across the stars, and where the dream of peaceful coexistence among diverse species had finally become reality. In the end, Marcus Kane reflected as his ship jumped to hyperspace, they had achieved something far greater than mere survival. They had proven that even in the vast darkness between the stars, hope could triumph over despair, and that the future belonged not to the conquerors, but to those brave enough to imagine something better. The galaxy was free, and it would remain free as long as beings of courage and wisdom were willing to defend that freedom. The legacy of the Liberation Alliance would endure not in monuments or museums, but in the simple fact that countless worlds could sleep peacefully under stars that shone with the light of liberty.